Hello, I'm Nick Martorelli. I'm a producer with Penguin Random House Audio, and for this episode of Meet the Voice, I'm joined by narrator Catherine Ho. Welcome, Catherine.
Hi, thank you, Nick.
How did you get started in audiobooks?
Well, I've always been a reader and I've always loved books. I did train as an actor, but I realized that I wasn't that happy being on camera and in person, and I really felt more comfortable with the audio side of things. Um, and so I just was submitting myself for open calls for audiobooks, and I just got really lucky. I got an audition for a book. They needed a narrator like me, and I went in and booked the job, and that was it. And then from there, I did some coaching and got introduced to people at Penguin Random House, and here I am.
What was that first book like? Was there anything that surprised you in the process of it?
It's always surprising how to engage with the material and when you're making the audiobook, how deeply you need to get into the book and kind of let everything else fall away. So, when you train as an actor, especially when you're training for on camera or, theater, there's a lot, there's a lot more going on, right? There's a lot going on. And for audio, it was definitely a process for me to sort of let things fall away and let the story sort of take me along in the storytelling.
And after that, I think your first book with Penguin Random House was a collection of short stories, right?
Yes, yes. I read the first story in the collection by Xuan, Juliana, Wang called Home Remedies, and it's just an incredible story. I think I will. I mean, if you haven't read it or engaged with it in some way, I really encourage everybody to do it because it's really an amazing story. The book is amazing. All the stories are really wonderful. But to have that story as one of the first jobs that I did, one of the first narrations I did, it was really a gift. I mean, the language is beautiful and just the imagery. I mean, she just that the last scene in that book, I think I will never forget. I go back to it sometimes to visit it just because of the way it just, I read the story and you get taken along, and that last scene is just really, it's amazing. It's really so visual, even though it's the written word or the you're listening to it. And it's just so striking and unforgettable. It's really an incredible story, and it's a beautiful way to open up the collection.
Was there a difference in your approach from a book to a short story?
That's interesting. It's really about language, right? When you're talking about the moving from a short story to a novel, and I think for me as a narrator, it gives me a little. When I'm in a novel, you have a little bit more time to sort of let things unfold and build, and for the reader's understanding. And when you're dealing with a short story, there's so much compression, and phrases have to carry so much more meaning. One sentence has to really take the reader much further. So the language is just different. Um, so for me as a narrator, I try to approach it, sentence by sentence, word by word. Like, when you first get the book or a story, I'm reading it to look for the big contours of the story, right? Where is this going? Are there any things that I need to know that I need to understand in my narration in the beginning that the reader will have revealed to them later? But then when I sit down with it, I really, and I'm in the booth that I'm narrating, it's really about that sentence, that moment, and staying in there and staying engaged with that so that the reader can stay engaged in that moment. So yeah, I mean, when I look at a short story or a novel, it's just a different amount of stuff I have to hold into my head, and the contours of it are different. But definitely when I'm in the booth, I like to stay in that as close to the moment of the book that I'm in that I can.
I really like that imagery of the contours of a book because I always talk about audiobooks as music and
Yeah,
that the narrator is the musician. And it's like you got to match
yeah.
the musician to the music. So I really like that sort of idea of like the contour of a book that you're trying to, you know, maybe find the pacing of, find the language of, find the sort of rhythm to really bring out what the author has written.
Oh, absolutely. Among people who are voice actors, I'm constantly finding people who were singers and or trained in music as musicians in some way, because it is very similar, right? It's like you're given a piece of music and you're following the notes, but you also have to find how to get the emotion out that the person who created this work intended. And so I think that that sort of engagement with it, as if, from my side of it as the player of this piece of music or this song or this story or this book, I think that really holds true, understanding that and approaching it that way.
When you're first approaching a book and reading it to get all those contours, what do you really respond to?
I really am a lover and respecter of stories and people who want to tell stories. And, when I'm given a book, I think my first very initial response is, no matter what's happening on the page or in the story, I've been given something that somebody has spent at the minimum weeks on, probably more like months and years. And I approach every story and book that I'm given with the respect that this is somebody is entrusting in me their a work that they've it's just so much work, so much effort, so much thought and emotion. Um, but I think as I get into the book, what I really love to see is I love to be surprised. Whether that's I'm being surprised because something's really funny, or I'm being surprised because the language is just so amazing, or I'm being surprised because I'm seeing something in a different way, something new and fresh, then I get really excited.
When you're narrating and there's a particularly difficult book or a particularly difficult passage of a book, like do you have tricks or methods of getting through those sections?
So I worked on this book that I really think is very important. It's called From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry by Paula Yu. And it's the story of this man named Vincent Chin, who in 1982 was beaten to death. And the story itself was very sad. And I grew up in the Midwest, and this happened in Michigan. So it's close to where I grew up. So this is the child. He was an immigrant, and I am the child of immigrants. And so I felt it felt very personal to me. This story, I understood the family dynamics in a way, and the landscape was very familiar to me. And it was a hard book for me to narrate because it was very sad. But what's wonderful about the book is the author Paula Yu went on to talk about how it really brought together a lot of people and ignited in a lot of Asian Americans this spirit of fighting for civil rights, which I think is in this country especially is just not really it's not common for a lot of Asian Americans to fight for civil rights, and I think focusing on that for the book was really wonderful. For me, what was hard about it was just I really connected with it emotionally, but it's a nonfiction book, so with that you have to kind of take a step back and give the information still. So it was slow going for me. I had to stop a lot and give myself some space to just acknowledge that having feelings about this book was okay, but that to do the work of the book, to do the work of the author, I really needed to step back and then come back into it with a little bit of perspective on getting the information out as she is wanting for her book.
I'm wondering if you have a method for when they take over in the other direction, when the
Yes.
words are coming too far forward and you're not quite as engaged, if you've got tricks to find that again.
Well, when you're talking about something like fiction, sometimes the language and just the storytelling can take over, and that is when the magic happens, right? That's really when you as a listener or reader or whatever is happening, you're just brought along by the author. And I think that when you're talking about a work of fiction, that's really what they're hoping for. And I mean, when that moment happens, it's just amazing. So I narrated How Much of These Hills is Gold by C. Pam Zhang, and that book definitely, just the language and the imagery and the characters and the storytelling really just kind of take over. And I mean, it was such an enjoyable, wonderful book to narrate for that. Um, when you're in a book like that, it just feels like the author has given you this gift of this trip, right? This journey, this adventure, and I'm not doing anything. I mean, she's done all of the really hard work. I mean, the book is genius, and it was a pleasure to do. I feel very fortunate that that came into my life and that I was the narrator on that. And in there, that kind of language definitely is very transportive, and there's also language that just kind of surprises you, and it keeps you awake as you narrate, like Bestiary by K-Ming Chang. It just, the whole, everything in that is, every engagement in that book, from the language to the characters to the events, it's just, there's something different about it, something a little strange, something a little bit unknown, which I love, because there is just this constant feeling of discovery that, and even just in the way that the words play with each other on the page. So as a narrator, engaging with that, you're just always awake because you just don't know what's going to happen. Like, I've read it before, but I still can be surprised because it is just that surprising. You can't, like a book like Bestiary, you just can't, you can't expect anything, right? Because she has her own way of looking at the world and telling you this story, and it's just, it's incredible. It was a really wonderful experience and a lot of fun for me.
There are some books where the biggest challenge narrator has to do is just get out of the way, like just sort of like let it happen and go along for the ride, as opposed to trying to do too much on the book.
For me, anytime you're looking at adventure or comedy, there's a lot of that. I narrated this book called Last Tang Standing by Lauren Ho, and it's just fun, right? There's just so much fun in it, and different, odd characters and fun little moments and scenes, and you do definitely stay in the moment as a listener and as a narrator. Um, it's always fun for me to read stuff like that, like Heiress, apparently, by Diana Ma. It's just, you're just in this different place, right? I mean, it's just such a light world, and I think we all kind of need that escape sometimes.
I know you like narrating YA books, and you actually
Oh yeah.
read some stories on Together Apart for me.
Oh
So
yes.
what is it about YA books that really appeal to you?
Yeah, I really do enjoy reading YA. I feel like that time in a person's life can be hard, right? You can feel maybe not, maybe a little bit alone, right? And I feel like books are just, and stories are just a wonderful way to recognize yourself or recognize your friends, and feel a little bit more like you have this place in your world. The ability to go into engage with the story, and see yourself a little bit in it can make you feel just that much more comfortable in the world. That's what I love about YA. I think a lot of the writers and authors are really focusing on um, people's understanding of themselves and how they engage with the world. That anytime you talk about storytelling, you're talking about how a being, a human or whatever it is, engages with the world, and I just think it's a beautiful thing about YA.
Well, Catherine, thank you for joining me here today on Meet the Voice.
Thank you so much, Nick. It was really my pleasure.